Have you ever felt so exhausted that you could fall asleep anywhere, at any time, regardless of the consequences surrounding you? Imagine the sheer adrenaline of committing a high-stakes burglary, where every single second counts and the slightest noise could lead to a prison sentence. Now imagine giving in to the overwhelming urge to nap right in the middle of that crime scene. This is not a fable or a slapstick comedy routine, but a genuine historical anomaly that has baffled detectives and amused the public for decades. Today on Midnight Docket, we open the case file on one of the most bizarre criminals in history who traded his freedom for a few hours of shut-eye. The year was 1924, and the city of Chicago was alive with the electric energy of the Jazz Age and the illicit thrill of prohibition. Gangsters ruled the streets and wealthy industrialists built fortresses of stone and marble to protect their fortunes from the chaos outside. In this era of excess and danger, crime was a serious business run by hardened professionals who planned every move with military precision. However, amidst the organized syndicates and ruthless mobsters, there existed a different breed of criminal known as the lone wolf burglar. These individuals relied on stealth and agility rather than brute force or numbers to secure their ill-gotten gains. Enter Jasper Finch, a man whose reputation in the underworld was built on his ability to vanish like a ghost, leaving no trace behind but an empty safe. Jasper was a 28-year-old drifter with a sharp mind and even sharper reflexes, known for scaling drain pipes and navigating rooftops with the grace of a feline. He had successfully burglarized over a dozen high-profile residences in the Gold Coast district without ever raising an alarm. His method was simple and effective, as he would wait for the darkest hour of the night, enter through an upper-story window and depart before the first light of dawn touched the skyline. On the night of October 14, 1924, Jasper set his sights on the sprawling residence of Mr. Archibald Sterling, a railroad tycoon known for his collection of rare coins and antique jewelry. The Sterling Manor was a formidable structure of gray stone, standing 3 stories tall and surrounded by an iron fence that looked more like a prison barricade than a domestic boundary. Jasper had spent weeks observing the household routines, noting when the servants retired and when the beat cop passed by on his nightly patrol. He believed this job would be his masterpiece, the one that would allow him to retire to a warm beach in Florida. The night was unseasonably cold, with a thick fog rolling off Lake Michigan and shrouding the streets in a damp gray blanket. Jasper approached the rear of the manor, wearing his signature charcoal wool vest and newsboy cap, his canvas tool bag slung tight across his back. He moved with practiced silence, avoiding the patches of gravel that might crunch under his boots and sticking to the shadows cast by the large oak trees. The house was dark save for a single dim light in the hallway, which indicated that the family and staff had long since retired for the evening. Jasper located a sturdy trellis covered in ivy that ran up the side of the house toward a second-story balcony. He tested his weight on the wooden lattice and found it held firm against the brickwork. With the agility that earned him his street name, he ascended the wall hand over hand, his breath visible in the frigid air. He reached the balcony and found the French doors latched, but not locked, a careless oversight by the staff that Jasper silently thanked them for. He slipped a thin metal tool between the doors and lifted the latch, sliding into the warmth of the Sterling residence. Once inside, the temperature change was immediate and seductively comforting compared to the biting wind outside. The air smelled of lemon polish and expensive cigar smoke, a sensory reminder of the wealth that surrounded him. Jasper stood still for a full minute, allowing his eyes to adjust to the gloom and listening for the rhythmic breathing of sleepers or the creak of floorboards. The house was silent as a tomb. He crept down the hallway, his rubber-soled boots making no sound on the plush Persian runners that lined the corridor. His target was the study on the ground floor, where the wall safe was concealed, behind a large oil painting of a hunting scene. Jasper navigated the grand staircase, keeping his weight near the banister, where the wood was strongest and least likely to groan. He reached the ground floor and moved toward the heavy oak doors of the study. Inside, the room was lined with books from floor to ceiling, and a large mahogany desk dominated the center of the space. Jasper approached the painting and swung it aside, revealing the steel face of the safe, just as his intelligence had predicted. Cracking the safe was a matter of patience and sensitive fingertips, both of which Jasper possessed in abundance. He pressed his ear against the cold metal and began to turn the dial, listening for the subtle clicks of the tumblers falling into place. 5 minutes passed, then 10, then 15. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool room, but finally, with a satisfying clunk, the handle turned. Jasper pulled the heavy door open and smiled as the beam of his small flashlight illuminated stacks of cash and a velvet bag heavy with gold coins. He loaded the loot into his canvas bag, feeling the satisfying weight of success on his shoulder. The job was done, and he had pulled it off without a hitch. By all accounts, Jasper should have turned around and exited the way he came, disappearing back into the fog before the sun rose. However, as he passed the kitchen on his way to the back door, a pang of hunger struck him with unexpected force. The adrenaline that had fueled his climb and the safe cracking was beginning to fade, leaving him hollow and ravenous. Jasper paused at the kitchen threshold, debating the risk versus the reward of a quick snack. He reasoned that he was ahead of schedule, and the house was dead quiet, so a few minutes would not hurt. He entered the kitchen, a pristine space of white tile and gleaming copper cookware. On the central table sat a platter of leftover roast chicken and a decanter of dark red wine. It was a feast fit for a king, and to a man who had not eaten a proper meal in 2 days, it was irresistible. He sat at the table and tore into the chicken, eating with the voracious appetite of a starving man. He washed it down with a glass of the wine, which was rich and heavy, warming him from the inside out. He poured a second glass, then a third, savoring the luxury of the moment. The warmth of the alcohol combined with the fullness in his stomach, and the residual adrenaline crash began to have a potent soporific effect. His eyelids grew heavy, and the room seemed to swim in a soft, hazy light. Jasper shook his head, trying to clear the fog that was descending upon his mind. He knew he needed to leave. He stood up, but his legs felt like lead weights. He decided he just needed to rest his eyes for a moment before making the climb back down the trellis. He wandered out of the kitchen and found a small sitting room adjacent to the pantry. In the corner was a chaise lounge upholstered in soft velvet. It looked like the most comfortable surface in the world. He sat down on the lounge, intending only to sit for a minute to let the dizziness pass. He placed his loot bag on the floor beside him, keeping one hand on the strap. He leaned back, closing his eyes and letting out a long sigh. The silence of the house was hypnotic. Within seconds, the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall became a lullaby. Jasper Finch, the master burglar, drifted into a deep and dreamless sleep right in the heart of the crime scene. The hours ticked by as the darkness outside gave way to the gray light of dawn. The fog began to lift, revealing the wet streets of Chicago. Inside the Sterling Manor, the household began to stir. The first to rise was Mrs. Agnes Miller, the head housekeeper, a stern woman who tolerated no nonsense and adhered to a strict schedule. She descended the stairs at 6 in the morning, ready to start the fires and prepare the morning coffee. Agnes moved through the kitchen, noting the empty wine decanter and the ravaged chicken carcass on the table. She frowned, assuming the master of the house had indulged in a late-night snack, though the mess was uncharacteristic of him. She began to tidy up, muttering about the extra work. As she moved to the pantry to fetch the flour, she glanced into the sitting room. There, sprawled on the chaise lounge with his mouth slightly open and a canvas bag clutched in his hand, was a complete stranger. For a moment, Agnes simply stared, unable to process the sight of a man in a newsboy cap sleeping in her sitting room. Then her eyes traveled to the canvas bag, which had tipped over, slightly spilling a few gold coins onto the carpet. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She stifled a scream and backed out of the room quietly, her heart hammering against her ribs. She ran to the telephone in the hallway and frantically dialed the operator, asking for the police. While Agnes waited for the authorities, she stood guard at the kitchen door, armed with a heavy cast iron skillet. Upstairs, the rest of the family slept on, oblivious to the intruder in their midst. Jasper, meanwhile, snored softly, completely unaware that his freedom had already evaporated. He was deep in a dream of tropical beaches and endless buffets. The irony of the situation was absolute: a master criminal undone not by a brilliant detective, but by a roast chicken and a comfortable chair. The police arrived 10 minutes later, their sirens silenced to avoid alerting the intruder. 2 uniformed officers and a detective named Sergeant O'Malley entered the house through the front door, which Agnes had quietly unlocked. She pointed a trembling finger toward the sitting room. O'Malley drew his service revolver and crept forward, signaling his men to flank him. They expected a desperate struggle or a fleeing suspect. Instead, they found Jasper still fast asleep, drool pooling on the velvet cushion. O'Malley lowered his gun and looked at his men with a mixture of confusion and amusement. He had seen many things in his 20 years on the force, but never a burglar who tucked himself in. O'Malley signaled to the officer on the left, who reached out and shook Jasper roughly by the shoulder, shouting for him to wake up. Jasper awoke with a start, flailing his arms and knocking the canvas bag to the floor. Coins scattered everywhere with a loud clatter. He looked up, blinking rapidly, to see the barrels of 3 police revolvers pointed directly at his face. The reality of his situation crashed down on him instantly. The warmth, the food, the nap, it had all been a trap of his own making. He raised his hands slowly, a look of utter defeat and embarrassment on his face. The officers hauled Jasper to his feet and handcuffed him. As they marched him out of the house, the commotion finally woke Mr. Sterling, who appeared at the top of the stairs in his dressing gown. He looked from the police to the handcuffed man to the spilled gold coins. When Sergeant O'Malley explained that they found the thief sleeping in the den, Sterling burst into laughter, a sound that echoed through the grand hall. The walk to the police wagon was the longest of Jasper Finch's life. Neighbors had begun to gather, drawn by the police presence, and they watched as the groggy burglar was led away. The story of the sleeping bandit spread through the crowd like wildfire. By the time they reached the station, the press had already caught wind of the incident. Photographers were waiting, their flashbulbs popping in Jasper's tired eyes. At the station, the interrogation was short and surprisingly cordial. There was no need for tough tactics or deception. Jasper confessed to everything, his spirit broken by the sheer stupidity of his era. He recounted the climb, the safe, and the fatal decision to enter the kitchen. The detectives listened, struggling to keep straight faces, as he described the quality of the wine and the softness of the chaise lounge. The newspapers had a field day. The next morning, headlines across Chicago screamed the burglar who fell asleep on the job and the NAPTIME bandit. Jasper became an overnight sensation, a figure of ridicule rather than fear. Cartoons depicted him wearing pajamas and carrying a teddy bear instead of a crowbar. The public found the story hilarious, a welcome distraction from the grim news of gang violence and corruption. The trial was a quick affair. The evidence was overwhelming, and Jasper offered no defense other than his own foolishness. The judge, however, was not as amused as the public. He lectured Jasper on the sanctity of the home and the wasted potential of a young man with obvious skills. He sentenced Jasper to 5 years in the state penitentiary, a punishment that wiped the smile off the faces of the courtroom spectators. Prison life was difficult for Jasper, not because of the physical hardship, but because of his new nickname. In the yard and the mess hall, he was known as Nap Time. Other inmates would mockingly offer him pillows or ask if he needed a warm glass of milk. His reputation as a skilled cat burglar was replaced by the legacy of his one colossal blunder. He spent his time working in the prison library, keeping his head down and staying awake. Jasper served 3 years before being released for good behavior. He emerged from prison into a world that had largely forgotten him, though the legend of the sleeping burglar remained a staple of barroom trivia. He never returned to a life of crime. The humiliation had been a more effective deterrent than the prison bars ever could be. He found work as a mechanic, using his dexterous hands to fix engines rather than crack safes. Years later, Jasper would tell the story to his grandchildren, transforming it into a cautionary tale about the dangers of greed and the importance of staying focused. He lived a quiet, honest life, dying in 1972 as a beloved member of his community. Yet in the archives of the Chicago Police Department, his mugshot remains a testament to the night he let his guard down. The story of Jasper Finch serves as a bizarre footnote in the history of crime. It reminds us that even the most carefully laid plans can be undone by the most basic of human needs. In the high-stakes world of burglary, where silence is gold and speed is life, Jasper proved that sometimes the most dangerous enemy is not the police or the alarm system, but the simple, overwhelming urge to close your eyes.